Welcome to my channel, fellow rotorheads. We gather to celebrate the beauty and the elegance of helicopter flight in the simulator environment as well as in real life. Today I'm flying a 206 B3 by Cowan Sim in New York City. This is where I grew up. Currently, we're flying over what is now known as Citi Field, in my day known as Met Stadium. The Beatles played there in 1964. It would be funny if they put a bunch of little Beatles down there for our amusement. LaGuardia Airport to the right, and New York, Manhattan ahead. I wanted to talk today about something that I think helicopter simulator people will find interesting, and that is how realistic is helicopter simulation versus the real thing. About a year and a half ago, I bought a virtual reality headset. Before then, I'd been flying flight simulators for decades on a flat screen, and I had flown regular planes and helicopters as well. I'd always found the helicopters fascinating but difficult to fly. There's just something unintuitive about how a helicopter flies with regards to a flat screen. So I found the VR headset to be a huge advantage and improvement in my flying skills in the helicopter. It didn't change much about how I flew airplanes. It was certainly more enjoyable in a VR environment, but for helicopters, the effect was significant in improvement of flying capability. After about a year of using VR and flight sim, I was inclined to believe that if I was given access to a helicopter, cold and dark, on the ramp in an airport, that I could just fire it up and fly it away. Now, one day, on a day of happy chances, I went to a museum that happened to have helicopters on display and talked to an old helicopter pilot, and he allowed me to sit in an old Huey, and it looked so much like the Huey in DCS. All the controls were the same. I took pictures, and he took pictures of me in the helicopter, and I was delighted. And he and I talked for a while, and he told me there was a helicopter training company not far from where we were, and that they could probably give me a flight if I wanted it. And I did go and seek them out that same day just to see what it was all about, and they happened to have a slot available, and I was delighted. I was happy to pay their fee for an intro flight. I told them that I had been flying a simulator for probably a year in virtual reality. I was familiar with all the controls and instruments, and I simply wanted to know just how realistic the simulator was compared to a real helicopter. Now, if you're not familiar with New York, I'll point out a few points of interest. We're approaching here what's known as Billionaire's Row, that set of needle-like buildings in front of us. That is essentially single floor complete apartments. Every floor is one apartment. And evidently only billionaires own those because they are hundreds of millions of dollars apiece. They have a lovely view of Central Park and the surrounding environment, but my understanding is that no one sees those views because no one lives in these buildings. They are owned by the billionaires, but no billionaire lives there, which is not entirely surprising. If you could own and live anywhere you wanted, that's probably not the place you would choose to spend most of your time. So I don't fully understand why they buy those. Anyway, I am disappointed I didn't record that intro flight. It would have made a great video. I didn't have a video channel then, and I didn't set out that day to go take an intro flight. That was complete happenstance. But I did get a nice selfie. I have that at least. Now we're approaching a building here with an interesting looking ledge I've tried to land on it and you fly right through it. Don't know what that's about. The map doesn't say that that's a landing strip, and it certainly doesn't act like one. Maybe a nice place to have lunch. Turning around here, we'll get a good look at the iconic Empire State Building. So after a brief safety meeting to discuss what not to do, things that I was certainly familiar with, we did go out for an hour flight, and I got giddy in the sense of actually controlling and flying this helicopter in cruise. I was flying it for the first time. This was a lifelong dream. It was outlandish to me that I was able to do this, and I felt completely comfortable. Before I go on, I wanted to point out this building with the giant M on the side here. That's the MetLife building. It used to be called the Pan Am building. That was an airline company that I used to intern for in the 80s. They ran a helicopter service from the roof of that building to Kennedy Airport for a short time. And it was a short time because they had a terrible accident there that resulted in the loss of life. And then they never allowed rooftop helicopter service from New York City after that. So after doing some cruise in the helicopter, we came down and practiced some hovering. That was significantly more difficult. I was able to do it, but certainly less steady than flying just at cruise speed and altitude. The trainer claimed that I was equivalent to about 7 to 10 hours of training, and that 70 hours would be needed to get a pilot's license. Now, what are the things that I was unprepared for and did not anticipate? I think probably the biggest thing is the collective control. I don't have one to work with in the simulator. I use the lever on the joystick. I realize now that that muscle memory and being comfortable is an integral part of being able to fly effectively. If your muscle memory is built on twitching a lever rather than the pulling of a collective, then you're going to be off. And so that's probably the biggest thing. There was also an air blast coming through the open door of the helicopter as we were doing 80 to 90 miles an hour, and that is hard to simulate. 80 to 90 miles an hour of wind in your face is a fairly significant, unexpected sensation that can throw off your sense of control. When you're flying not straight in a helicopter in a simulator, you can put on a fan to simulate that, but that's not 80 to 90 miles an hour. Additionally, that wind also seemed to create what felt like a wind-blown umbrella sensation. That is, an uncontrollable desire for the helicopter to tip over in the wind. Now, that was not, I'm sure, a realistic sensation. The helicopter was not going to tip over in the air, but that's kind of what it felt like. And it was a little rattling to be flying with that sensation. Obviously, you don't want that to happen, even if it's just your perception that it's going to happen. I can't lie that having an open door, even though I was strapped in, an open door looking down 800 feet, straight down, does give you a sense of fear that is essentially impossible to recreate in a simulator. So there's that aspect of fear. And then on the ground or in hover, there's the fear of wrecking $1 million piece of equipment. When you're on the ground, any small error could result in a catastrophic damage to property and possible death. So there's that fear. Altogether, with these sensations and feelings, I would rate that my experience flying this helicopter in real life for the first time felt about 60 to 70% realistic compared to a simulator using the VR. And I will say that my opinion is that the VR is responsible for the majority of that. That flying on a flat screen versus real life there is almost no similarity to that. I think it would be essentially impossible to have an intuitive feel for how a helicopter flies using a flat screen. Once I had the VR, suddenly it felt much more intuitive. Still a challenge, but it made more sense why a helicopter does what it does. Now, given that a VR device has such a significant impact on realism, I now see things like motion rigs in the $1,000 to $6,000 range, and many people talk about how impressive those are and what a significant difference that is. And I wonder how close to the filling the gap between simulator and reality one of those would be. I am curious how much more of that space between 60 to 70% and 100% a motion rig would fill. Now, I've seen at least one other video where a flight simulator enthusiast actually had a real helicopter flight where he controlled the helicopter. And there was a lot of lively discussion about whether there was any transferring of skill base from simulator to real world. So my experience is basically just another single data point on that experience chart. And I'm curious if anyone else has had anything like that and what their experience was and how they would rate it. I'm looking forward to your comments and discussions, and I actually have more to say about the parallel between simulation and reality, and I'll save it for another video because we've already gotten to the 12-minute mark on this one. Anyway, thank you for coming and listening, and whether it's just a simulation or real life, may the feeling of that rotor wash over you.